Good evening, Shindo here. Well, did you ever think that you would see the day when the President of the United States would be calling upon our servicemen to institute torture? He doesn't even take the use of a euphemism for torture. He simply refers to it as torture. The President of the United States, folks, is now calling upon those who are in active service, the United States of America, to torture our enemies. And I don't believe it mentions this in the article, but I saw part of this interview that will be on ABC tonight. And among other things, Trump says that these Muslim extremists like ISIS are beheading our people. I thought that was very interesting that he said our people are being beheaded, because Americans are not being beheaded in the Middle East. It's not happening to Americans. If it was happening to Americans, the American military would be bombing the crap out of ISIS every day. We would have heard about beheadings of Americans. So when Trump says they're beheading our people, he's not referring to Americans. He's referring to Christians. It is a religious war, a new crusade. And trust me, there are plenty of so-called Christians that are 100% behind him in this. This is from ABC News. Headline: Trump says torture works as his government readies a review. You will find a link to this article that's in the description box, as you always do. Please subscribe to my channel, comment, like, and share my videos. President Donald Trump declared Wednesday he believes torture works as his administration readied a sweeping review of how America conducts the war on terror. It includes possible resumption of banned interrogation methods and reopening CIA-run, quote, black site prisons outside the United States. In an interview with ABC News, Trump said he would wage war against Islamic State militants with the singular goal of keeping the U.S. safe. Asked specifically what the simulated drowning technique known as waterboarding, Trump cited the extremist group Atrocities Against Christians and others and said, "We have to fight fire with fire." Trump said he would consult with new Defense Secretary James Mattis and CIA Director Mike Pompeo before authorizing any new policy. But he said he had asked top intelligence officials in the past day, "Does torture work?" quote unquote. Quote, and the answer was yes, absolutely, unquote, Trump said. Well, I've never heard anyone say that torture works, because the people being tortured will tell you whatever you want to hear to stop you torturing them. But apparently Donald Trump thinks it works, and therefore it does work. Because if Donald Trump believes it, it must be true. He added that he wanted to do, quote, everything within the bounds of what you're allowed to do legally, unquote. A clip of Trump's interview was released after the Associated Press and other news outlets obtained copies of the draft executive order being circulated within his administration. Beyond reviewing interrogation techniques and facilities, the draft order would instruct the Pentagon to send newly captured, quote, enemy combatants to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, instead of closing the detention facility as President Barack Obama had wanted. Altogether, the possible changes could mark a dramatic return to how the Bush administration waged his campaign against al-Qaeda and other extremist groups, except that Bush never called it torture. Trump spokesman said, Sean Spicer, questioned about the draft order, said it was, quote, not a White House document, unquote, but would not comment further. House Speaker Paul Ryan told MSNBC the draft order was not written by the Trump administration. Quote, my understanding is that this was written by somebody who worked on the transition before. This is not something that Trump administration is planning on, working on, unquote, Ryan said. The draft says U.S. laws should be obeyed at all times and explicitly rejects, quote, torture. But its reconsideration of the harsh techniques banned by Obama in Congress raises questions about the definition of the word and is sure to inflame passions in the U.S. and abroad. He's not mixing words. He just calls it torture. After September 11, 2001 attacks, President George W. Bush authorized a covert program that led to dozens of detainees being held in secret location overseas and to interrogation tactics that included sleep deprivation, slapping and slamming against walls, confinement in small boxes, prolonged isolation, and even death threats. 3 detainees faced waterboarding. Many developed psychological problems. While some former government leaders insist the program was effective in obtaining critical intelligence, many others say that abuses weakened America's moral standing in the world, hurt morale among intelligence officers, and proved ineffective before Obama shut it down. The AP obtained a draft order from the U.S. official who said that it had been distributed by the White House for consultations before Trump signed it. The official wasn't authorized to speak publicly on the matter and demanded anonymity. The Pentagon didn't immediately comment, and Spicer, Trump's press secretary, said, quote, I have no idea where it comes from. But reports of the upcoming order quickly sparked alarm among Republicans and Democrats. Quote, the president can sign whatever executive order he likes, but the law is the law, unquote, said Republican Senator John McCain, tortured himself as a prisoner during the Vietnam War. Quote, we are not bringing back torture in the United States of America, unquote. Oh, it's not going to be on our shores, no. They're not going to torture them here in the United States. On the campaign trail, Trump spoke emphatically about toughening the U.S. approach to fighting the Islamic State group. He said he would authorize waterboarding and a, quote, hell of a lot worse. After winning the election, however, he appeared to backtrack, pointedly citing Mattis' advice that torture is ineffective. Pompeo, Trump's CIA director, said in his confirmation hearing that he would abide by all laws, but he also said that he consult with CIA and other government experts on whether current restrictions were an, quote, impediment to gathering vital intelligence to protect the country, or whether any rewrite of the Army Field Manual is needed, unquote. Specifically, Trump's draft order calls for reinstating an executive order, quote, to the extent permitted, unquote, by current law, the President Bush signed in 2007 and Obama later revoked. Trump's draft would reverse 2 other executive orders of Obama's. One called for closing Guantanamo Bay, the other ordered the CIA to shut any detention facility it operated and prohibited in the U.S. from using any interrogation techniques not listed in the Army's field manual, demanding treatment in compliance with the Geneva Conventions, including timely access for the International Red Cross to all detainees. Among the interrogated techniques banned by the manual were forced nakedness, hooding, beatings, sexual humiliation, threatened by with dogs, mock executions, electric shocks, burnings, and waterboarding. Any changes would face steep legal and legislative hurdles. McCain, the Senate Armed Service Committee chairman, may be the most formidable opponent in Congress, but he is not the only one. Quote, it is wrong, and I hope we will rethink it, House Democrat leader Nancy Pelosi said. On Guantanamo, the draft order says detention facilities, quote, are a critical tool in the fight against international jihadist terrorists. Groups are engaged in armed conflict with the United States, its allies, and its coalition partners, unquote. About 40 detainees remain in Guantanamo. The document says, quote, over 30% of detainees who have been released have returned to armed conflict, with at least a dozen conducting attacks against U.S. personnel or allied forces in Afghanistan. 6 Americans, including a civilian aid worker, died as a result of those attacks. U.S. intelligence agencies say 17.6% of detainees released from Guantanamo are confirmed to have re-engaged in conflict. An additional 12.4% are, quote, suspected of re-engaging. Trump's pledge on the campaign trail to, quote, load it up with some bad dudes, unquote. But it's unclear who the new detainees would be, as American ground troops have stepped back this decade from the front lines in Iraq and Afghanistan. Captures of high-level detainees have become much rarer, and Obama tried to direct them through U.S. justice system. Well, I don't think that the Congress is going to just rubber stamp the idea that those Army personnel on the field, to give them the rubber stamp to torture. The Army Field Manual will continue to tell your average soldier that you're not to torture an enemy combatant. However, the fact that Trump, being president of the United States, is pro-torture, I mean, it's insane for me to say pro-torture, but that's what he is. So the fact that the president of the United States is pro-torture, it really doesn't matter whether or not the Army Field Manual tells the average soldier that he can torture people or not. I think if you're inclined to want to torture people, which I imagine there are a few people in the military who are like that, quite a few. So if you're inclined to do it and you know the president is okay with it, the president of the United States, your commander-in-chief, I don't think you're worried about what the Army Manual tells you to do. What do you think? So I'm guessing that that is exactly what's going to happen on the battleground, that these soldiers who are inclined to do so will indeed torture other human beings on the battlefield. This, folks, is what happens when you elect a man who has no conscience, who is a complete megalomaniac and a sociopath. That is what happens, so that he can protect us being Christians. This is Shindo. Have a good Wednesday.